Protecting justices. Lawmakers take action to provide security as another pro-life pregnancy center suffers vandalism. Election results, where a pro-life Republican won an open congressional seat. Treasuring the elderly. Why Pope Francis warns against a generation without roots. And faith in sports. How one group encourages women to combine both. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, June 15, 2022. Good evening from Washington, D.C. I'm Eric Rosales in for Tracy Sable. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill have passed a bill providing around-the-clock security for Supreme Court justices and their families. It's in response to protests at justices' homes over the last several weeks. Recently, police charged a man with attempting to murder Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Republican Senator John Cornyn, a co-sponsor of the security bill, tells EWTN News Nightly President Biden needs to speak up.
I'd like to hear the president speak about the importance of protecting the lives of these public servants. Nobody deserves to be threatened or with violence, and certainly the Supreme Court should not be intimidated. They've got a job to do, and they will do it, but we need to make sure that they can do so safely. And it's not just them, it's their families.
It's important to note that it is a violation of federal law for people to demonstrate near the homes of any judge, yet protesters have been gathering and threatening justices and their families over the past several weeks.
It's interesting why President Biden's been silent on death threats. He was even earlier, weeks ago, encouraging people to go to the houses of Supreme Court justices when it's a violation of federal law to try to threaten, bully, and intimidate a judge of any kind to change their opinion on an issue before the court.
Republican Senator Bill Hagerty and Democratic Senator Mark Warner have introduced a bill that would approve some $20 million more that's been requested by the court and the U.S. Marshals Service to address security threats against the justices. Well, those protests come as we await a Supreme Court decision which could overturn Roe v. Wade. Meanwhile, vandalism strikes yet another pro-life pregnancy center, this time in Philadelphia. Take a look at this, folks. The Hope Pregnancy Center suffered nearly $15,000 in damage last weekend from graffiti and smashed windows. There is a possible online claim of responsibility. Republicans have gained an additional U.S. House seat for the rest of the year following a special election victory by a pro-lifer.
We cannot accept the increase of gas, of food, of medication. We cannot accept that.
Mayra Flores defeated 3 opponents, including 2 Democrats last night for the vacant seat in South Texas. Flores was born in Mexico, is the daughter of migrant workers, and is married to a U.S. Border Patrol agent. And joining me now is Vince Coglianese, editorial director at the Daily Caller. Vince, welcome back.
Thank you.
Well, as you just heard, Republican Mayra Flores won in a special election down in South Texas last night, and she ran on the values of God, family, and country, and she also wants to secure the border. How significant is her win?
I think it's giant. I mean, this is the first time a Republican has won this particular district since it's existed for the last decade. And in particular, this will be the first Mexican-born woman to go into Congress, and she is a Republican. I think it represents a sea change among Hispanic voters in the United States who are very rapidly shifting away from the Democratic Party. And if you look at her district in particular, she comes from Brownsville. That's about as far south in Texas as you can go, as far south in the continental United States as you can go, right across the border from Mexico. It's a community that's 85% Hispanic, and this wasn't even close. She outraised her opponent by, I think, 16 times, and then in the end was able to win here in this special election, and she'll hold the seat until later this year. Well, she'll run yet again in the general election, but I think it's a very big sign of what could be coming in November.
And moving on now to South Carolina, as we know, Representative Tom Rice, a 5-term Republican congressman who voted to impeach former President Donald Trump over the January 6 riots, well, he lost his re-election bid. What do you think that signals?
Well, one, I would be remiss if I didn't mention just how many great headlines can be written about this race, because the guy who beat Tom Rice is Russell Fry. So Fry Rice, that's the gift to Donald Trump on his birthday, which of course was yesterday. Trump endorsed Russell Fry in this race. He wanted to get rid of Tom Rice, especially because of that impeachment vote. And South Carolina voters obviously found that appealing. They sided with Donald Trump. They sided with his endorsed candidate. And, as the media assesses every Trump endorsement, and he's lost a few, but he's won the majority of endorsements so far going into November. It demonstrates, I think, to some extent, Donald Trump still has a very big presence in Republican politics and certainly national politics.
He is still definitely the face of the Republican Party right now, would you say?
I think so. But although I will admit there are other people who are competing for that distinction, the guy who jumps to mind is Ron DeSantis in Florida, who's very much trying to, I think, take that position.
On a different note now, the House passed a bill last night to protect the U.S. Supreme Court justices and ensure their safety. Talk about the importance of that, especially as we await the decision that could overturn Roe v. Wade.
It's critical, but it's one that it took dragging Nancy Pelosi kicking and screaming in order to achieve it. It could have passed last week. She delayed it. The politics of it seem very transparent. She's been trying to run this January 6th committee, suggesting that her political opponents are some sort of threat to democracy. Meanwhile, it is true that these have been lefties who've been committing acts of violence and threatening acts of violence against pro-lifers, and especially Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was able to avoid an assassination attempt thanks to law enforcement being present at his home. That's why that bill came forward, and that's why the Senate unanimously passed it. It took a little extra time for the House to finally do it yesterday, but it comes at a really important and scary time as pro-lifers across the country are under attack. We've seen a number of fire bombings of pro-life pregnancy centers, and even earlier this week, a state legislator having his office, he's pro-life, being firebombed. It's a bad trend, and our lawmakers and government officials need to stop it as quickly as they can.
And earlier this week, the White House press secretary was asked if the president's physical and mental health is good enough to continue his political career through another presidential campaign. Now, she laughed it off and replied that she could barely keep up with President Biden. But your thoughts on that?
Well, it's pretty clear to anybody who's watched Joe Biden, certainly through the years and during this presidency, that he's lost a step. There's no question about that. And I bet you in his honest moments, if he was sitting in front of you, he'd probably tell you the same thing. But here's the reason why that question came up. It came up in a CNN interview, and that's because you're watching as the left in the United States is increasingly concerned that Joe Biden is not in any position to be president of the United States again. His approval rating is abysmal. It's the lowest it's ever been. There's not a lot of confidence that he could even win re-election. And ahead of the midterms, the chatter's already growing. The New York Times just running an article this past week that included strategists like Obama strategist David Axelrod, indicating that it doesn't look like Joe Biden is ready or capable of being president again in 2024. This has become an open conversation, not just among Republicans, but now among Democrats. And the White House is struggling to answer it, which is why you get the nervous laughter.
Well, Vince, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your time and insight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Eric.
President Joe Biden turned his focus back to Ukraine today, promising the war-torn country more U.S. aid. The president says that he offered President Zelensky another $1 billion in military supplies, including advanced rocket systems. President Biden also committed $225 million to provide water, food, and medical supplies to people still living in the war-torn area. The president will travel to Europe later this month to meet with NATO allies. Coming up, your money, how interest rate decisions could affect family budgets. Plus an update on the health of the Holy Father as the World Meeting of Families draws closer. Welcome back. Well, today the Federal Reserve approved the largest interest rate hike since 1994. The goal of this 0.75 percentage point increase is to counteract the record high inflation America has been facing. And joining me now on how more about this is Joel Griffith, Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Joel, welcome back.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Well, as you just heard, this has been the largest interest rate hike in nearly 3 decades. Talk to us more about that.
Well, look, over the last 2 years, the Federal Reserve has been asleep at the wheel. In fact, they've done far worse. Our central bank has printed trillions of dollars, about $80,000 per family of four. They've injected that into our economy. They've been buying up government debt in order to allow politicians to spend far beyond their means. And a lot of us were warning a year and a half ago that if the Fed keeps printing money to pay for this expansion of government, we're going to end up with inflation. That's exactly what we have today. And now it's a bit amusing because now the Fed is claiming that they're solving the problem. Well, they're forgetting to mention that they actually created the problem. It's like an arsonist who sets fire to a warehouse and then boasts about the pails of bucket that he's throwing onto the fire to extinguish it, all the while his buddies are throwing more gasoline into the back door.
It sounds like a bad dream right there. Well, speaking of inflation,
Yes.
as prices do go up, companies are now engaged in shrinkflation, basically giving consumers less of the product for the same price. Tell us more about this trend that you're seeing.
Look, well, producers know that we as consumers, we're feeling the pinch, but they want us to keep buying. And I think all of us are noticing the bags of peanuts are getting smaller, the toothpaste tubes are getting shorter and narrower. Well, it's not in our imagination. These prices for basic goods are increasing at double-digit rates. Increases on rent is 25% year over year. And at the Heritage Foundation, we've gone ahead and we actually show that each and every month, almost each and every month, people in the United States have really seen a pay cut because inflation has been outpacing wage growth almost each and every week over the past year.
And we're still seeing supply chain issues. Feminine hygiene products now, medical dye are the latest items being caught up in this shortage, and it seems like it's never ending. Any of these new items, how can we make this supply chain more resilient?
Well, we need to have our politicians just stop the interference. Look, the original sin with all of this was the shutdowns of the factories and the ports. And a lot of the truckers found it very difficult to go from point A to point B because they couldn't even take restroom breaks in some of these states.
Wow.
So that was the original sin. Now we've complicated it. We have laws in place that say if you want to go from one United States port to another United States port, you have to be on a ship that's constructed in the United States. Well, that rules out 98% of all shipping vessels. And then you have California, where a lot of our goods come in from Asia. We have to truck them across the country. California, during the pandemic, has actually been banning older diesel vehicles, and they've actually been making it difficult for independent truckers to even operate. So a lot of what we see right now with the supply chain problems, it's not the problem of businesses. They haven't caused the problem. It's been state officials and it's been our federal government officials that have created the supply chain issues.
And no joke, I mean, they're actually thinking about spending even more money up on Capitol Hill. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're getting a taste right now of what happens when you have Congress approving billions of dollars of spending and relying on our central bank to print the money. It results in inflation. Everybody loved getting those stimulus checks in the mailbox not too long ago. A few $1,000s per family, money for the kids. Businesses enjoyed getting cash even though they weren't open. But now we're realizing that there are strings attached. It's called inflation. When you print money to fund government operations to mitigate problems that government caused, someone pays for it, and we're all paying for it right now.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Israel's foreign minister looks forward to President Joe Biden's upcoming Mideast trip. Yair Lapid believes that the visit might help improve ties with Saudi Arabia.
There is a linkage between the visit and the ability to improve relations in the
Israel
entire
and Saudi Arabia currently have no official ties. Israel would like to include its Middle East neighbor under the diplomatic terms of the Abraham Accords. Well, Pope Francis asked the elderly to accept their physical limitations.
È proprio la comunità cristiana che deve prendersi cura degli anziani.
In his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the 85-year-old notes that growing older can be a gift because it gives people patience. He told the crowd that he now walks with a cane. Pope Francis also called on the community to look out and listen to the elderly. Failing to do so would lead to, quote, a generation without roots. Meantime, the Holy Father recently sat down for a wide-ranging interview with the editors of a Jesuit magazine. It was released earlier this week and touches on a number of topics, including the church in Germany and here in the U.S. And joining us now from Rome is Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, can you tell us more about the Pope's comments on the U.S. and Germany?
Certainly, Eric. This interview is making headlines also over here, quoting the Pope's comment on the U.S., where he sees what he called restorers, Catholics who would not accept the Second Vatican Council in the U.S. These comments were inspired by a question on spiritual renewal of the Church. Ignoring Vatican II would be an obstacle to church renewal, Pope Francis suggested. But overall, Eric, the U.S. remark was brief in nature and more of an aside if we look at the whole interview. The Pope gave much more space to commenting on the German synodal path. The German journalist asking the question tried to frame the situation in the German church in a positive way. Pope Francis did not accept this. He explicitly warned that we would not need two evangelical churches, as he wrote in a letter to the head of the German Bishops' Conference, Bishop Betzing. The Holy Father resented that the synodal path is being led more by intellectual elites and is much influenced by external pressures. Eric, the Pope obviously sees the political agenda that leading figures in the German church pursue. And Bishop Betzing is quite open about the fact that he wants the church to change. Same-sex relationships and women ordinations are amongst the top priorities. But the Pope was clear that he is not happy with this. Pope Francis wrote an extensive letter to Catholics in Germany in 2019, addressing what he called the erosion and the decline of the faith in the country. Catholics should convert, pray and fast, and bring the gospel to the people. Topics that are of little relevance to the theological elites pushing the German synodal way.
And I understand that next week's going to be very busy for the Holy Father with the World Meeting of Families, and he just canceled his participation in tomorrow's Corpus Christi festivities and his trip to Africa in July. Now, will the Pope be able to participate in these events?
Well, Eric, we all hope that the Holy Father will be able to participate. EWTN is actually the official media partner of the World Meeting of Families and will be live broadcasting from Wednesday through Sunday. Pope Francis will appear in several occasions, and we're looking forward to welcoming thousands of delegate families from across the world, especially also from the U.S. The delegation will be led by Archbishop Coglianese. And Eric, in the run-up to this world meeting, Pope Francis addressed the importance of family as the nucleus of society several times. He affirmed that family is founded on marriage. Just last Friday, in a meeting with the Federation of Catholic Family Associations in Europe, which is a family think tank. Family, Pope Francis said, is the first cell of our communities. And regarding his health, the Pope is obviously not doing well. That is why things are being canceled. But he's very disciplined, and I'm rather confident to see him at the festivities next week. He's still answering, for example, letters personally. A few weeks back, my own daughter, 9 years old, sent him a painting of St. Peter's with the recently canonized saints, assuring him of her prayers. And he thanked her personally with a handwritten note.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, tonight I understand that you're holding another one of EWTN's Roman Nights events on the rooftop of our Vatican Bureau. Now, the panel will discuss a wide variety of topics about the World Meeting of the Families next week. Real quick, can you introduce us to the theme of this year's event?
Sure. The theme of the World Meeting of Families will be Family Love, a Vocation and a Path to Holiness. And this is what I will be discussing with the organizers of the event and family expert here on our terrace. Our viewers can see it on our YouTube channels or enjoy a summary on our Vaticano show very soon.
Can't wait for that. Well, Andreas Thonhauser, thank you so much for joining us, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Up next, how a new program promotes faith and female athletes. One Catholic organization is mixing faith and women's sports. Fierce Athlete uses Catholic Church teaching and theology of the body of the I'm sorry, I screwed that up. That was my fault. One Catholic organization is mixing faith and women's sports. Fierce Athlete uses Catholic Church teaching and the theology of the body to help women live up to their athletic potential while keeping their faith at the center of all they do. And joining me now to discuss more about it is Samantha Kelley, founder and president of Fierce Athlete and a former Division I soccer player as well. Samantha, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, tell me a little bit more about Fierce Athlete and why you started it and the meaning behind the acronym FIERCE.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you said, I was a Division I soccer player, and after college, I spent a number of years mentoring top athletes around the country. And I just consistently noticed the struggles of identity that they were having and how that unfortunately manifested in their lives. And about 6 years ago, the Lord asked me to start Fierce, specifically for women. There's a lot of amazing Catholic apostolates out there, but I found that the issues that women were dealing with specifically were different than men. And I wanted a space for women to feel like they could grow in both their faith, but also physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Amen to that.
Fierce
what does it stand for?
They're big words, but they're kind of our tenets. It stands for femininity, identity, embodiment, receptivity, Catholicism, and encounter.
Oh, beautiful. Now, you mentioned some of the challenges that female athletes face today. How does Fierce Athlete help you overcome some of these obstacles?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've found that any struggle that the athletes I work with are having stem from a lack of understanding of who they are as daughters of God. So if you ask the typical athlete who they are, they're going to say, I'm an athlete. And that comes with a whole level of pressure from their parents, from their coaches, from society in general. And as a result of that, of not knowing their core identity, they face a lot of pressure. And unfortunately, they deal with some hard things like body image, eating disorders, promiscuity. The play hard, party hard culture is very toxic. There's also a lot of same-sex attraction, unfortunately, that exists in women's sports.
But with specifically, as an athlete, we're faced also with disappointments of not living up to the challenge. So that's where our faith incorporates that into athletics, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. John Paul II says that athletics is the gymnasium for human virtue. And so it's such a great sphere for young people to grow in virtue, things like perseverance, things like learning how to handle failure. When you can incorporate faith into that, the gifts that they've been given from the Lord and teach them to give those back to the Lord, you really help order their identity and, just see their ability to then play in freedom.
Yeah, it really is. It really is about giving it up to God and with your ability. And, we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary of Title IX this month. And as you know, the Department of Education now interprets Title IX to protect sexual orientation and gender identity. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, this has some scary implications for women's sports. As a result, biological males are being allowed to participate in women's sports. People that I unfortunately identify as transgender. We just saw most recently with the UPenn swimmer Leah Thomas winning the NCAA championships. And so, while Title IX has done so much for women athletes, it really is under a threat at the moment. So we're in some interesting times.
Yeah, interesting times indeed. Let's get back to your organization, Fierce Athlete. If people want to find out more about it, where can they go? Who can they call?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great website, fierceathlete.org. And that has all our resources on there. I would probably direct people to our podcast as well. It's the Fierce Athlete Podcast. And then, I travel the country speaking, partnering with different middle schools, high schools, and colleges, running retreats and clinics. And I also mentor individuals one-on-one, everywhere from, the D3 level all the way up to pro athletes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, is there anything else that you'd like to add there about your organization that we're not touching on?
I think that's pretty much it. It just would ask for your prayers for women's athletics in general, that they could remain protected and that women could continue to use it as an avenue to grow in their own femininity, but in their confidence and their freedom as women and as daughters of God.
Well, thank you for being there for the daughters of God and for women out there and giving them an outlet.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, take care.
Thank you so much.
Well, we want to thank you for watching tonight. I'm Eric Rosales. We hope you have a blessed night. God bless you and your family. Have a wonderful night.